Alright ladies, we all kind of ended up in class on different parts of the notes, so I'm going to start at the beginning of the Montgomery Bus Boycott, and if you've already gotten through this part, then you can fast forward to where we left off in class. So I first want to talk about what bus segregation looked like. It wasn't separated into two separate buses, but buses were segregated by separating blacks and whites on each individual bus. So African Americans were forced to sit in the back, while white citizens had the front rows. And then the other etiquette rule was that, hypothetically, if the entire white section was filled and all the seats were taken, and another white person got on the bus, then the bus driver could legally ask anyone in the black section to give up their seat for a white passenger, even if it was a woman. So pretty unfair. How this all went down. Rosa Parks was a seamstress and also a secretary for the NAACP, and she was actually convinced early on to act and to kind of protest this law. So one day in December of 1955, she boarded a city bus and sat on the frontmost row of the African American section, kind of knowing that if the white section was to fill, that her seat would be the first one that would have to be given up. And sure enough, a white man boarded the bus and demanded her seat, and she refused to get up. So she was arrested and sent to jail. So she's still a very brave, empowering woman, but there was just a little bit of planning that went into the early stages of this. She's also lucky that it was a man who demanded her seat, because it just made her look like people could even sympathize with her even more, that a woman was expected to give up her seat for a man. So the effect of this, in terms of what's going to happen after, is that civil rights leaders in the city are going to immediately organize a bus boycott, a citywide bus boycott in Parks's honor, where basically they just started issuing flyers and explaining what happened to Rosa Parks and demanding that all African Americans boycott the public bus system in Montgomery. And the leaders felt this method of protest would be effective, since African Americans made up a large majority of the riders of the buses, so it would be an economic hit to them. Now, it's through this event we're going to see a man introduced to the scene that we're going to talk about throughout the rest of the unit, and that is, of course, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., who was 27 years old at the time. He was asked by civil rights leaders to be the boycott's spokesperson. Now, a little background on King, not too much. King lived during the Depression, but his family was fairly well off, so he ended up okay. He was college educated, continuing on to go and get his PhD, and he eventually moved to Montgomery, Alabama to become a pastor. But what I really want you to know is that Martin Luther King followed a policy of what's called civil disobedience. And civil disobedience means refusing to obey a law that is deemed immoral by using non-violent forms of protest. So, like, you're purposely disobeying or breaking the law, but by doing things like Rosa Parks did, refusing to stand up. We'll see other, marches or non-violent forms of protest. Going into all white restaurants and refusing to leave, and then getting the crowd riled up, but you peacefully sitting there silently. That's a non-violent form of protest. So that is kind of really a strategy for King, because if you think about it, if African Americans are to kind of take the passive approach, then when people react harshly to them, they're made to look the victim, like nationally, like when the media catches attention of these instances. So in terms of what happened with the boycott, because African Americans were no longer using the busing system, King did have to organize this kind of large carpool system where people were still getting picked up and dropped off in the appropriate places, and a lot of people also chose to walk as well. And then after about a year of all of this happening, a judge in Alabama eventually did outlaw segregation in buses, so the bus boycott is considered successful. We're also going to talk about next the formation of the civil rights organization that King is the main leader of, and that is the SCLC, which stands for the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. It was founded soon after the bus boycott by several dozen black ministers, but King was chosen to be the organization's first leader, and they were dedicated to non-violent forms of protest and civil disobedience, and they really did become a main organization that pushed for voting rights and end to segregation and really equality for all, and they're going to be pretty integral to this movement. Alright, we're going to now pick up with an event that is kind of a response to the Brown versus Board decision. So once Brown versus Board said that schools needed to integrate, it's going to take some time for all the different schools throughout the country to get on board and accept this. But we will see slowly but surely that they do. But again, it's a process nationally. So we're going to look at an instance in Little Rock, Arkansas. So Little Rock, Arkansas school board kind of came up with a plan to gradually integrate the school by enrolling groups of African American students at a time, and the school board decided to start with 9 African American students that are going to be sent for the first time ever to a school named Central High School. That is pictured on the screen, a rather large school. So this will be the first time Central High is integrated, and these 9 African American students are to be the integrators, if you will. And they were chosen, by the way, on good behavior and their high grades, so they were high in their class, in their classes, I should say. So on the day that these 9 students are supposed to start their classes, the governor of Arkansas actually sent the National Guard troops of Arkansas to block the entrance to the school. So the governor's trying to prevent them from entering. And then also there's this angry mob of young white high schoolers meeting these meeting these 9 students, just like yelling at them, harassing them, almost throwing things at them, spitting on them. And this is kind of pictured here on my screen if you want to look. This one picture on the top left is a pretty infamous picture of this very, very angry young white teenager behind little Elizabeth Eckford, who's just trying to walk to class with her sunglasses and her books, and she's kind of seething in the background. Side note, unrelated, but I think Oprah Winfrey had these 2 exact women on her show, like in the 1990s, where the white woman apologized to her, so that's kind of cool. But anyway, all of this is kind of there's a lot of national attention from this event. The students were not allowed to enter because of the National Guard. They were sent home, and so it's just very kind of upsetting, and it got a lot of negative national attention. The president, Dwight Eisenhower, is seeing what's happening. So the president basically takes control of the Arkansas National Guard and orders the National Guard troops to allow the students to enter the school, and so eventually that's what's gonna happen here. It is going to take multiple attempts, but eventually Eisenhower not only takes control of the National Guard, but because the mob just got angrier and angrier every time these African American students tried to enter, they also send in divisions of the U.S. Army, and with the protection of the National Guard and the Army, eventually by September of 1957, the 9 students were allowed to enter the school. Now you can imagine that the students are extremely brave, in the sense of they are going to be harassed for pretty much the next school year, but they are trying to make a stand for what is right in the field of education. A few students ended up transferring out of the original 9, but some did make it the whole year. Alright, we're now going to transition to talking a little bit about civil rights under President John Kennedy. That is going to be SNC, more commonly referred to as SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. This interracial organization was made up of mostly students, college students. Kind of was a break-off, actually, from the SCLC, because the youth kind of wanted a voice for their own. And even though it was mostly college students enrolled, there was a older, middle-aged African-American woman named Ella Baker, who was actually their first leader. Now, SNCC was mostly famous for holding sit-ins. Sit-ins basically were a form of protest and kind of a form of civil disobedience, really, but African Americans would go into a place where they were legally not allowed to be. They would sit and they would refuse to leave. This would be like theaters, restaurants, bus stops, buses. And a lot of times they'd be arrested for these types of actions. More commonly, there would be violence from angry, white mobs, kind of greeting them with hostility and tormenting them. And there's one particular instance at the Woolworth counter. It's like a little lunch counter, and there's a quote here by a member of SNCC who was involved in one of the most famous sit-ins. It was at Woolworth in the heart of the downtown area, and we occupied every seat at the lunch counter, every seat in the restaurant. A group of young white men came in and they started pulling and beating primarily the young women. They put lighted cigarettes down their backs and their hair, and they were really beating people. In a short time, police officials came in and placed all of us under arrest, and not a single member of the white group, the people that were opposing our sit-in, were arrested. You don't have to type down that quote at all. I should have said that in the beginning. But this just shows you that the local law enforcement isn't really punishing the people who are acting violently. But when pictures, like on this previous slide, are taken, and you see these kind of innocent people just sitting quietly having their lunch, and they're being, things are being dumped on them and poured on them, it's very clear who's made to look like the victim and who's looking like the attacker, and this is what the nation is kind of seeing. So this is really gaining support, gaining sympathy for the blacks in the South and those who are protesting. I want to introduce a city, Birmingham, Alabama, that experienced a great amount of violence during this movement. It was probably the most segregated city in the South and highly dangerous for African Americans. The KKK was very powerful in this region of Alabama, as they probably had a few higher up political figures as part of the Klan, and so they're protected by those government officials. Two key figures, though. Bull Connor, first off, he was the police chief, and he's in charge of an all-white police force, and he would use this police department to really oppress the African American community. Anyone who tried to, if there was any sort of peaceful protest or march, the police officials were ordered to, use batons and beat them. He often would release police dogs on marchers that would bite protesters, and he would also use fire hoses, like the fire department's fire hoses that are extremely high water pressure, that could fling people around, very violent, and that's Bull Connor. Now, George Wallace was the governor of Alabama at the time, and let me just tell you, he's quite the classy individual. That's sarcasm if you're not picking up on that. He's pretty much a super segregationist, doing everything in his power to keep Alabama segregated for as long as possible. He had no desire to integrate the school systems, and because you have leadership like this in place, that makes things slow down in terms of integrating schools and abiding by Brown versus Board. And I would encourage you at this time to pause this screencast really quickly and go Google the 1+ minute clip of George Wallace's Segregation Forever speech, because it will give you a moment of humor and you'll get to just see the kind of individual he was in real life. The last thing we're going to talk about today is, I think on your outline you just have the date, April 1962. And this is in Birmingham, okay? So King was leading some forms of civil disobedience in Birmingham. He kind of started a larger series of marches and sit-ins in Birmingham, Alabama. And the police department was very violent with King's form of protest, and again released dogs, released fire hoses, and this kind of caused a lot of national media attention, and not one that shone a positive light on Birmingham's law enforcement. Obviously, again, people are sympathizing more with the protesters. So a judge in Birmingham is going to issue a law that there should be no more marches or public protests, and King had never personally broken the law before, but he is going to purposely choose to break this law, and he's going to be sent to jail for it. And I know in your English classes, if you haven't yet, you're eventually going to read as a primary source letter from a Birmingham jail, which is one of King's greatest writing or written works, but this is when he writes that, and that is in the early 1960s. Alright, we're going to pick up with a few more things in class on Wednesday, but for now, if you have any questions, please write them down. Okay, and let me know what your questions are when I see y'all on Wednesday. Y'all have a good day.